That's where Simon Cowell found himself. He'd built a life in the spotlight, measuring everything by ratings, contracts, the sharpness of his instinct. He was untouchable, or so he thought. Then 2013 happened. The world saw scandal. Simon, the king of judgment, expecting a child with Lauren Silverman, his friend's wife. The newspapers devoured it, the gossip never stopped. But behind the chaos, something extraordinary was happening. Simon, who never imagined fatherhood could be for him, was watching life change in ways he couldn't have scripted. When he first saw that scan of his unborn son, it was like a door inside him had swung open. He hadn't even held the child yet, hadn't heard a cry, hadn't felt the warmth. But something shifted. And on February 14th, 2014, Eric Philip Cowell arrived. Named after Simon's own father, that tiny act carried weight no one else could see, linking past and future, forcing Simon to rethink who he wanted to be. Suddenly, all the things that once defined him as big deals, red carpets, endless commitments, felt less important. He started saying no to things he thought he couldn't live without. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, his world became smaller but richer. It started with little things. Eric wasn't speaking when other kids were already forming words. Crowds overwhelmed him. Bright lights, loud sounds, even small changes set him off. People told Simon it was normal, that every child develops differently. But he knew, deep down, something was unfolding that couldn't be ignored. Nights became long. He'd lie awake, reading, searching, piecing together what these signs meant. But it wasn't fear driving him, it was love. That same eye that could dissect a performer's talent, that could size up a star in seconds, now watched his son. And slowly Simon realized Eric wasn't broken. He was on his own path, sharp, quiet intelligence shining in ways the world didn't always notice, solving problems before anyone asked, feeling deeply, expressing subtly, teaching Simon that understanding mattered more than fixing. The world only glimpsed fragments, a golden buzzer moment on Britain's Got Talent, headlines calling it cute, heartwarming. But the truth was invisible. Months of preparation, attention to every detail, light, sound, space, so Eric could feel safe enough to be there at all. What looked effortless was anything but, and with each small victory, Simon began turning down more work. Not because he wanted to fade from fame, but because he had discovered something worth more. A single boy teaching him to slow down, to see the world differently. The ruthless Judge Millions knew quietly became a man reinventing himself not for ratings, but for love. Then came a trip. A family vacation meant for memories and laughter. Instead, it became a mirror. Every unfamiliar sound, new food, strange bed sent Eric spiraling. One night at dinner, as other families laughed, Eric froze, hands over his ears, rocking, overwhelmed by the world. Simon reached out helpless, realizing instinct alone couldn't soothe him. That night, he called Lauren. That night, they decided they had to stop. It was time for answers. Fatherhood had done something to Simon Cowell that the world never saw. It had stripped him down, exposed him, and rebuilt him. No spotlight, no applause, just love demanding a different kind of attention. And in that quiet transformation, he found the kind of fulfillment no contract could ever buy, because this isn't just Simon's story. It's a reminder that the moments we dread, the ones that break our routines, challenge our instincts, can also reshape us. And sometimes, the life you think you understand is waiting to teach you everything about love, patience, and seeing the world through someone else's eyes. Months blurred together in a haze of evaluations, observations, questions, assessments. Simon sat through them all, half terrified, half desperate to understand. Every new detail felt like a breadcrumb leading him somewhere he both feared and longed to reach. And then, one cold December morning in 2018, he walked into a small office and heard it. The words he had been circling, imagining, worrying over. Autism spectrum disorder. It wasn't a shock. He had seen the signs, felt them in his gut, but hearing it spoken aloud, seeing it written down, that made it real. It was tangible in a way that sleepless nights and quiet worries never had been. The doctors spoke carefully, speech delays, sensory sensitivities, an almost desperate need for routine. But they spoke of strengths too, a memory that could latch onto patterns, a focus that would leave most adults in awe, a detail-oriented mind that saw the world differently. They called it moderate autism. A label, yes, but more than that, a roadmap. Not to change Eric, but to change the world around him, so Eric could thrive. Simon left that office carrying a weight that pressed down on his chest, but for the first time, he also carried clarity. Every gut instinct, every restless night, every protective impulse suddenly made sense. His instincts had been right. Now denial was impossible. Action had to follow. Back in Malibu, he rebuilt their world from scratch. Softening lights, reducing sounds, arranging furniture with precision, every corner, every object, every detail was considered through Eric's eyes. Their days became a rhythm. Quiet mornings with simple routines, afternoons filled with therapy speech, occupational behavioral. Playdates looked effortless to the world, but each was carefully mapped so Eric could navigate them without being overwhelmed. Simon learned to read his son differently. Words were no longer the measure. Instead, he watched gestures, glances, how a toy car was aligned just so. Progress arrived in whispers. A single word, a hug that lingered, a fleeting moment of eye contact. To anyone else, these were small wins. To Simon, they were everything. And still, behind every victory was a quiet grief, not for who Eric was, never that, but for the future Simon had once imagined. The spontaneous adventures, the silly jokes, the carefree moments he had assumed would come naturally. He realized he was rewriting fatherhood itself, learning to define love through patience, silence, and steadfast presence. Some nights, he would sit in Eric's room, watching him sleep, feeling a weight of responsibility heavier than any deal, any stage, any spotlight he had ever commanded. The public never saw this. They saw Simon Cowell, the sharp-tongued judge, the empire builder. But behind closed doors, his world had narrowed to one focus, creating a space where his son could be understood, protected, safe. Fame, travel, headlines faded into background noise. The center of Simon's universe had become one boy, who had quietly transformed him from a man who measured success in empires into a father who refused to let his child be unseen. And then came the hardest test. The world wanted to fit Eric into a story, a spectacle, a headline. Rumors whispered. Paparazzi lurked. The private life they had built so carefully began to collide with the public gaze. And when a tabloid published photos of Eric struggling, twisting a moment of overwhelm into fodder for amusement, Simon knew he had to act. He chose his words carefully, simply, Eric is autistic. He's happy, he's loved, and he experiences life differently. No drama, no defenses, just protection. And in that quiet honesty, he found the power of truth. The world could see what it wanted, but Simon knew what mattered. The letters started coming quietly at first. Emails, notes, messages from parents of autistic children, from advocates, from people who had never met Simon but wanted to say thank you. Thank you for giving visibility to a world so often misunderstood, for showing that being different doesn't mean being less. Support poured in from places he never imagined. And yet, alongside the warmth came a new reality he hadn't anticipated. In the eyes of the public, Eric was no longer just his son. He had become a story, a headline, a diagnosis people wanted to dissect. Simon had hoped that honesty would quiet the rumors. Instead, it cast him onto a tightrope. How do you protect your child while using your voice to educate the world? How do you balance the desire for privacy with the responsibility to make a difference? Slowly, Simon found his answer not by speaking about Eric, but by speaking about autism itself, about early intervention, about patience, about seeing ability where others only see limitations, about respect. Autism wasn't something to fix. It was something to honor. And in teaching others, Simon reminded himself every day, his first duty was not to the public, but to his son. Behind closed doors, Simon's life changed in ways he hadn't expected. The man who had once thrived on spontaneity and chaos now lived by precision and structure. Family trips were planned with military-like attention to detail. Meals were thought through hours in advance. Playdates weren't spontaneous. They were carefully orchestrated to minimize overwhelm. Gone were the small freedoms he had once taken for granted, unplanned adventures, last-minute vacations, quiet moments of chaos. But what replaced them was something far deeper, a fatherhood that demanded patience, empathy, and a kind of presence that reshaped the very way he saw the world. Every day became a lesson in seeing life through Eric's eyes. Simon learned to read gestures, subtle glances, the way Eric aligned a toy just so. Progress arrived in whispers rather than fanfare. A word finally spoken, a glance that lingered, a hug that held meaning beyond its weight. To the outside world, these might have seemed like small victories, easily overlooked. But to Simon, they were monumental. Each moment was proof that love, patience, and understanding could build a bridge to a life that others might never fully comprehend. And yet, even amidst these small triumphs, there were private moments of grief. Not for who Eric was never that, but for the life Simon had once envisioned. He had imagined a different kind of fatherhood, spontaneous laughter, playful chaos, easy conversation. Instead, he found himself rewriting what it meant to be a dad, discovering that love could be patient, quiet, structured, and fierce all at once. Some nights he would sit in Eric's room watching him sleep, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing harder than any television deal, any empire, any accolade he had ever earned. The public didn't see any of this. They still saw Simon Cowell, the sharp-tongued judge, the man who built empires from music and television. But behind closed doors, everything revolved around Eric. Fame, travel, headlines, they all became background noise. The center of Simon's universe was no longer a career or applause or public adoration. It was a single boy who had changed everything, unknowingly transforming a man who measured success in ratings and deals into a father who measured it in hugs, milestones, and the quiet victories no one else noticed. And then came the hardest challenge of all. The world, insistent on turning private lives into public stories, began encroaching. Rumors whispered, paparazzi lingered, social media speculated. Eric was no longer just a child living his life. He was a story. The breaking point came one afternoon when a tabloid published photos of Eric struggling in a moment of overwhelm, twisting his pain into fodder for amusement. For Simon, it wasn't just frustrating. It was personal, protective. It was the moment he realized he had to act, not as a celebrity, not as a mogul, but as a father. He chose his words carefully, simply, honestly. Eric is autistic. He's happy, he's loved, and he experiences life differently. No excuses, no dramatics, just protection. And in that quiet statement, Simon found a kind of power he had never known before. The power of truth, of boundaries, of love expressed through courage. Support poured in. Parents, advocates, people who had been waiting for someone like Simon to speak out. Letters, messages, emails, they all said the same thing. Thank you for showing the world that autism doesn't define a person's potential, that difference deserves respect. And yet the challenge remained. Eric was no longer invisible to the world, and Simon had to balance the line between advocacy and privacy, between awareness and exposure. Through it all, Simon changed in ways even he hadn't anticipated. The man who once thrived on unpredictability now embraced structure. The man who had chased chaos now found joy in routine. A different kind of fatherhood had emerged, one that demanded sacrifice, patience, and presence beyond anything he had ever experienced. And yet, even in the quiet sadness of letting go of old dreams, new joys appeared, celebrating a new word, a shared smile, the gentle weight of a hug. Victories invisible to most became monumental. Their bond, built not on laughter or easy conversation, but on trust, recognition, and love, deepened every day. To the world, Simon Cowell remains the sharp-tongued judge, the empire builder, the icon of television. But to Eric, he is simply Dad, the one who bends the world until it fits, the one who fights battles invisible to the world, the one who gave up one vision of fatherhood to embrace a braver, truer one. And maybe that's what makes a story unforgettable. The courage to let go of the life you imagined, and the willingness to embrace the life that's waiting for you, shaped by love, by sacrifice, and by the quiet moments that truly matter. Because in the end, it's not the headlines that define us, not the applause, not the deals. It's the lives we touch, the people we protect, and the love we refuse to let go of.